Hey guys, this is your host Nitin Binhani and a very warm welcome to my startup podcast channel Jazair Audio, where we share real stories with real learnings. With the advent of internet, cloud platform and low-code tools, launching a tech startup is relatively easy now. Yet, 9 out of 10 startups still fail, and if that's not all, 75% of the funded startups still fail. So what better way than to learn from a serial entrepreneur who has repeatedly launched and scaled up 3 different tech startups? And that's exactly why in today's podcast I invited Shirish Nadkarni, a serial entrepreneur as well as the author of best-selling book From Startup to an Exit, an insider's guide to launching and scaling up your tech business, to share his practical insights on launching a startup, getting it funded, scaling up, and subsequently finding an exit. So, let's welcome today's special guest. Hi Shirish, welcome to Jazair Audio. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Nice to talk to you.
So, to start with, how easy or difficult is it to launch and scale up a tech venture?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's both easy and difficult to launch and scale a tech venture. It is easy from the perspective that today funding is much easier to acquire. You have services like AWS and Azure and Google Cloud that allow you to build your tech solution in the cloud very easily without having to invest in servers and so forth that you had to do 20 years ago. And you have platform shifts happening in terms of new technology innovations happening like AI, ML, etc. that allow you to build new solutions to old problems. So from that perspective, it is relatively easy to launch venture. However, there are thousands of startups that are getting started every year. And as you know, 9 out of 10 startups fail. Primary reason they fail is because they fail to satisfy a customer need that is, deep and important. And so really the biggest challenge today is to find a value proposition that really resonates with customers and that they're willing to adopt in a short period of time.
So what should be the ideal journey for any venture?
This is something I talk about in my book, From Startup to Exit. The first thing that I really focus on is making sure that your idea has merit and that you're building, as they say, an aspirin, not a vitamin, and that you are really spending time to make sure that you're achieving what I call product market fit, which means that you have a solution that really addresses a market. So one of the things I talk about in my book is the importance of, conducting customer interview, really understand the customer problem. And before you even describe your solution to your customers, potential customers, you should really ask them, what are your top 2 or 3 main problems or issues that keeps you awake at night. And if the problem that you're addressing is not one of those problems, then that's going to be a real issue, because even though it's a problem for them, if it's not top of mind, then your sales cycles are going to be very long, hard to convert a potential customer into a paying customer. And in fact, you should pivot right there and ask them more about their existing problems and see if you can pivot to providing a solution that addresses their primary needs. So that's one phase of getting started. The second piece is really developing a strong go-to-market strategy. And you can do that actually even before you have a solution in the market. So what I recommend is actually building a mock website and using Google SEM or Facebook ads to drive traffic to that website and test different value propositions, different messages, and see if you can register users to your solution. And that'll give you a good sense for what messages are resonating, if your message is resonating at all with customers, and what your potential cost of customer acquisition will, and if your business model will sustain that cost of customer acquisition. So those are some of the things that I talk about in the book about the different phases of your journey for your venture.
In your book From Startup to Exit, you talked about what tech startups must do to succeed in each phase. Tell us a bit on each.
Yeah, so I talked about first phase, which is achieving, product market fit. The second phase is about being a go-to-market strategy. The next phase is about fundraising and to raise funding for your startup, there are two important things that you need to focus on. One is you need to have good traction. It's a lot easier to raise money when you show that you have some customers who are using your solution. They may not be paying customers, but if you have customers who can talk about why your solution is addressing their needs, that is generally good enough to get early seed stage funding. And the second thing that I talk about is the importance of articulating an overall story or a vision behind your company. So as an example, with my second startup, LiveMocha, which was founded in 2007, social language learning, I talked about the whole trend around globalization and how there were 1 billion people around the world who were looking to learn English so that they could get ahead in their careers. And that was an important story to tell, and that captured people's imagination, and that's how I got funded. Yeah, and then the next phase is running your company. I talk about the importance of creating a vibrant company culture, which I think is very, very important, so that as you grow, especially scale your company, and you can't talk to every employee. The culture is really what defines how your employees act in certain situations, how the decisions go forward, how to become a great leader, and then developing your overall business model. And then finally, finding an exit for your company. And that can be through an IPO or through an acquisition, and how important it is to sell your company when times are good, not when times are not so good. Then you have to sell your company. It's better, as I say, for your company to be bought, not sold. So it's there are many things to talk about, of course, this journey, but these are some of the high level things.
With regards to the fundraising, how should founders do it efficiently?
In terms of your fundraising strategy, as I mentioned, very important for you to have good traction, good proof points that you can use to get investors really excited and interested in funding your startup. You need to manage the process so that you're starting your conversations with a set of investors around the same time and can take them through that process. Because what can happen is if certain investors are well ahead of other investors in terms of timing, then you might get a term sheet before other investors are willing to put together a term sheet. And what you want is a situation where you have multiple investors competing for your business at the same time and bidding up the valuation that they invest in your company with. So it's very important to manage the overall process so that everybody's on the same timeline and you're getting multiple investors to bid for your business.
So just to add to it, when should founders start the fundraising process?
It really depends on your reputation and idea. If you have a very strong reputation and you have strong technology skills, or you're a serial entrepreneur, then oftentimes you can raise money with a PowerPoint deck. But for the average founder, better to wait until you have some number of customers who are trying your product and are enthusiastic about your product. They don't need to be paying customers per se. Obviously, if they're paying, that's even better. But if they're at least using your product and are enthusiastic about it and can be references to you, that's the stage at which you can start your fundraising process. And then there are different milestones that you need to achieve at every stage. So here in the US, for example, if you want to raise Series A funding, then the rule of thumb is that you need to be at least a 1 million ARR annual recurring before VCs that are investing. Or if you're looking at Series B, then you need to be growing at 200-300%, be at about 4 to 5 million in revenue. So there are different milestones that you need to achieve at different stages of fundraising cycle.
So you being a serial entrepreneur with decades of experience, could you share your own journey or the insights from your 3 different startups?
Yeah, I've done 3 different startups and achieved 2 successful exits out of that. With my first startup, Timon Systems, which was in 1999, very early days of the internet. The solution that I originally launched didn't really resonate in the market. We were too early at that point, and then we had to. Fortunately, I had raised a lot of money, and I had enough time to pivot to a mobile email solution that finally got traction and got customers, and acquired BlackBerry, and that solution became BlackBerry Internet Mail, consuming BlackBerry, and had over 50 million users at its peak. With my second company, LiveMocha, this was in 2007. As I mentioned, when globalization was very strong, our solution clearly hit the mark right from the beginning, grew very rapidly, got to 1 million users and to about 15 million users worldwide in 200 different countries in about 4 years. So the company grew very rapidly, and we had widespread usage around different countries around the world. However, we ran into the challenge of monetization because because most of our users were outside the US, and many of our users were from countries like Brazil, India, China, where at that time credit cards were not that common. And so even though people wanted to pay for our lesson, they couldn't pay for it. So we had low conversion. But of course, that problem has now been solved and a lot easier to monetize wherever you are in the world. So we had to, as a result, ultimately sell the company to Rosetta Stone. So I've had very interesting experiences where I've had to, I've had solutions that, clearly resonated with the market right from the get-go, whereas there are others that didn't, and we had to pivot on the right solution. So it's been a varying kind of type of journey. That's what, a founder typically has to deal with is there are many twists and turns, and what you start off with may not be what you end up at the end of the day, and you have to be willing to, adapt to the realities of the marketplace.
And if you were to talk about the successes as well as the failures, what would those be?
Yeah, I think the things that I kind of mix the two. I've certainly learned from my mistakes. With my first company, the mistake I made was assuming that my idea had merit and that the world would adopt my solution. But that turned out not to be true, and we were well ahead of our time. And what I learned was that, doing market research, focusing on achieving product market fit is very important, which is something that I did with my second startup. And that, as I mentioned earlier, took off right from the get-go. The second thing I would say that I've done well is really managing the funding and the cash I had in the bank from my investment I got with my first company, for example. At that time, this was during the time of the dot-com boom. A lot of companies were raising huge amount of money, but they would also spend that money very quickly. And a lot of them went bankrupt when the dot-com bust happened. Whereas in my case, I was able to survive through the dot-com bust and finally sell my company because I managed the cash flow very effectively. And the third thing is it's all about people. You need to hire really good people, which I was fortunate to do. I had really good co-founders, and I developed strong leadership skills. And I found that being honest with your employees, even in the difficult time when we had to pivot and I had to cut my burn, let go of some of my employees. Being honest with your employees was a very important attribute of my success, and employees came to trust me, work hard to achieve our goals, even though they knew that we had some challenges ahead of us. So those are some of the key lessons that I've learned through my journey.
Finally, tell us a bit about your book From Startup to Exit and how to get it.
Yeah, I've kind of an idealistic mission around the book. First of all, as I mentioned to you, 9 out of 10 startups, fail. But the one startup that succeeds can change the world. So my hope with the book is to change that equation even so slightly, so that I inspire more entrepreneurs to pursue the path of entrepreneurship. And if I can make it so that 2 out of 10 startups now succeed instead of 1, I can hope to have a significant impact on the world. So that's kind of behind kind of some of the thinking around my book. And I've designed it to be a guidebook, like a virtual advisor. I advise, many companies. I've been doing that for the last 5 years. And I would often get the same questions. I've run across the same types of issues. And so I decided to write this book to be a guidebook so that wherever you are in your journey, I can share not only my experiences, but also experiences of other entrepreneurs and help you avoid some of the mistakes that I made, others have made, and be a lot successful with it. In terms of where you can get it on, of course, on Amazon, both in the US as well as in India. And HarperCollins, who's the publisher, is making that available through a number of bookstores. So, if you Google my book, I'm sure you'll find different bookstores that carry it.
So with this, we have reached at the end of this podcast. Shirish, it was a pleasure to have you on Desire Audio, and thank you for sharing great insights with us.
Great chatting with you, and I hope this conversation was useful for your listeners.
Are you a founder of an early stage startup and looking to raise funding? Get your startup investor ready before even you start pitching to your prospective investors. For know-how, please visit www.jazaro.in. That is www.jasaro.in.
Lastly, I want to thank all the listeners who took their valuable time to listen to this podcast. Keep rocking, be safe, and don't forget to share.